that's my story. But my story is not unique because other workers, we continually see this happening too in this industry. I joined DWU, that's Domestic Workers United, in 2001 and supported many domestic workers that went through similar and worse cases. First, I could remember one of the cases was Marina. This lady, she worked for this family. She was paid less than $3 an hour and was forced to sleep in the basement where the sewage would continually overflow. And we at Domestic Workers, we had a very tough time trying to get justice for her. Then there was Joanne, who was sexually abused by her employer at gunpoint. Then there was Margarita, who worked around the clock and was never paid any overtime for the work she do. And this is what happens in this industry. Today, domestic workers are over 200,000 in the New York metropolitan area. And they're primarily women of color. Women from the Caribbean, women from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa. And we all come in search of jobs. We all come in search of an opportunity so that we can get something to send home to the families that we left behind. And then we find ourselves in this lawless industry. And facing all kinds of abuse and exploitation. And then you look at the reason that this is happening in this industry. Domestic work is rooted in slavery. From the days when they brought the slaves in, the workers in the house were known as the domestic workers. And they had the farm laborers in the fields. But when they tried to get some laws to help domestic workers, it still didn't help domestic workers, because when the laws were made, it excluded domestic workers. It didn't include us. The major labor victories that was won, the National Labor Relations Act, it left out domestic workers, and this was on purpose, because as a mean to help the people that employ them, it left them out. It left out us as workers, and this is what makes the industry so vulnerable, because of not having any standards in this industry. And the past 6 years now at Domestic Workers United, we've been fighting for the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights in New York State. And this is the first comprehensive legislation in the history of the U.S. to recognize us as real workers and to guarantee basic rights and benefits like paid leave and notice and protection against discrimination. And it would also set a standard not only for the workers but for the people that employ workers, because the employers then would understand that they have a responsibility to the workers that they hire. So in the wake of this economic crisis now, the work has gotten even worse, because there's no safety net for domestic workers. And so now it is very, very urgent that the people in the legislature pass the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, because we know that the governor, the now governor, let's hope that he remains for a little longer, he stated publicly that when this Domestic Workers Bill come to the floor to him, that he's going to sign it into law. So, asking everybody to get on board and help us really push for this legislation to help the domestic workers and make sure that all of our efforts is not in vain. Thank you.
And everyone will take questions at the end. So we'll next hear from Linda Oalican. I should have asked you before. I'm sorry, my dear. Linda was a founding member of DAMAYAN Migrant Workers Association. Since she migrated to the United States in 1994, she has worked as a domestic worker and personally experienced the abuses, exploitation, discrimination, alienation, and helplessness until she found other workers and organizers who worked with her to build DAMAYAN Migrant Workers Association. She is the organization's program coordinator and directly manages Luna's Holistic Health Program. Linda?
Thank you. In 1994, I came to the U.S. in search of a higher paying job. I wanted to send my 2 children to good universities, and my salary as a government employee will not make that happen. I knew that because my profession back home is not recognized in New York, I will end up as a domestic worker. But nothing prepared me for the abuse, racism, marginalization, and alienation that I personally suffered in the industry. After 8 years of organizing with DAMAYAN, I now understand that the exploitation and abuse of domestic workers is rooted in society's devaluation of women's work, and that the exploitation of our labor is intertwined with our class, race, and gender oppression. My story is just like Barbara's story. It's one of the 200,000 domestic workers in Metro New York. Based on DWU's report, 99% of domestic workers in Metro New York are foreign-born, 95% people of color, and 93% women. These findings capture the global migration of workers, mainly women and people of color from poor global south countries migrate to the rich global north countries like the US. But what is happening in the global south that push people to migrate? We would like to offer to you the Filipino people's experience to give us a better idea. About 4,300 Filipinos leave the Philippines every day to find work in foreign lands. 75% of them are women, and 90% of these women become service and domestic workers. Today, Filipino domestic workers are in 196 countries around the world, more than the number of countries represented in the UN. By 2006, 70 million Filipinos are already struggling to survive on $2.39 a day, with the poorest 28 million surviving on less than $1 a day. Women from the peasant, workers, and urban poor are particularly most vulnerable. Even middle-class women, professionals, or business women lose livelihood. A classic case of this is DAMAYAN member Mary Chu Bawanan. Mary Chu was a graduate nurse who opened up a small business to make ends meet, but she lost her business and paid to find work abroad through former Philippine UN Ambassador Baha's families. But instead of a decent job, she was forced by the Bahas to work as their domestic workers, 7 days a week for only $100 for 3 months. Since 2008, Mary Chu has been successfully suing the Baha family and has a pending legal case against them. Mary Chu is part of the millions of Filipinos who suffer from a corrupt and dysfunctional Philippine government. Instead of focusing on improving the economy and creating jobs at home so that Filipino women are not forced to work overseas, the government perpetuates neoliberal policies that deepen poverty for the majority of Filipinos.